Hello and welcome to The Lucky Roll, an eclectic channel for eclectic games. I'm Sean.
I'm Eric.
And today we're going to be doing a versus episode, something we haven't done for a very long time. So today it's going to be Tiny Towns
versus Quadropolis.
Now, before we get into the fight night, let's just give a little quick synopsis as to what the games are. So, very briefly, what is Quadropolis?
Quadropolis sees you as a city planner, architect, trying to build up a whole metropolis, big modern city, as it were.
Tiny Towns is very similar in that you're building a tiny little town, but you've small space. So you have to kind of plan how you build the town and where you put the space. So there is a kind of a maximization of resources in it. So they're nice, similar enough games. And I thought this is why these be perfect at kind of versus components.
Yeah, you're building a city in both effectively. So yeah.
And the other interesting thing is that you're actually from the city.
Yeah, yeah, I am.
And I am a culture. So we got a rural versus kind of urban thing going here as well.
Yeah, okay. I suppose it's ironic because that's actually your game and this is actually my game.
Yeah, well, that's true as well.
Way around. It's a tale of two cities.
Well, okay. Let's start with the very first question.
Yeah.
First impression. You're walking into the store. There's only 2 games left. It's Christmas Eve. You got to bring something home to the family. It's got 1 copy of Tiny Towns and 1 copy of Quadropolis. You know nothing about either.
Mm-hmm.
You're basing everything off the box art.
Just the box art.
Just the box art. Just literally what you see in the lid.
So which will I go for on box art? I would say, honestly, Tiny Towns. And it's just purely because it's bright, it's colourful, it has a more upmarket feel to it with the kind of classic old style village architecture to it as well. Yeah. No, there's nothing wrong with the box art on this. The characters are almost kind of like, they remind me of like Pixar or Disney CGI characters.
Yeah. There's a touch of Bob the Builder to it. But yeah, I know what you're saying, like that it's, sorry, go on. It's...
Yeah, that's just the main difference, but like I would go for that. On top of that, this just by the box cover looks more complicated, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, you know what? And that's actually ironic because
this is technically the more complicated one.
It is actually the more complicated one, but it's ironic in the sense that they're both brain freezers in certain points. But I'd be tended to agree because even though that's the more complicated one, it looks like the simpler one. Whereas this is, on impression, I'd be the same as yourself. It looks like it's a more elaborate game. That there's more kind of strategy, more style, more kind of middling to adult range. Whereas that looks a bit kiddie. And it's just down to the actual art style. But that is, ironically, the harder game of the two of them.
Yeah, then for me, this looks more complicated. For you, this doesn't.
Yeah.
It's unusual in that aspect.
But it's also strange as well because like you're a father and I'm not.
Yeah.
So I mean, if you were looking to buy a game for your family, for the kids, based on the covers, which one would you go for?
It would be Tiny Towns still. Again, it's very colourful, it's bright. Tiny Towns, it just makes me think of like it's a small world after all, or that like it's for young people, you know, like I think you said to me like a Sylvanian Families vibe. Yeah. It's some other time like that's the vibe it gave to you.
Yeah, it does. It just reminds me of a kind of a Sylvanian Families was something my baby sister used to toys she played with. So it does give me that vibe. But that, like I said, there's a touch of Bob the Builder to it, so it just seems a bit too kiddie. So for a man who doesn't have children, this would be what I would go for based on the box lid alone.
Okay.
But strangely enough, again, ironically, that is the more complicated game.
Yeah.
So I guess the next thing we should talk about is components.
Okay.
The components in the game. Were you happy with the components in Quadropolis?
The components in this is fantastic. It's got like resin or plastic, little energy barrels and meeples. It's got this really nice extra large pawn almost for the mirror, first player marker and stuff like that. And then it's got nice thick card or chipboard for the tiles and stuff like that. And then it has this like actually quite useful and fantastic insert to tie everything away, and everything has its place in that box.
Yeah, actually, the insert in that box is first rate. I mean, that tells you it's a very well designed game when you can put it away so completely and properly.
Mhm.
And it also helps with the gameplay as well, because you go through kind of like, was it 4 or 5 levels?
Yeah, there's 4 rounds, and it's even marked out. It's like, this is round 1, take these tiles. This is round 2, take these tiles, and so on.
Yeah, it's like there's great design in that game. The components in this, they're mainly wooden meeples, but they're nice. You know, there's absolutely nothing wrong with them. The card stock is very good. The little kind of squares you build on, like it's reflected in the price, but it's actually very good value, because even though they're wooden meeples, they're nice, they're colourful, there's a nice little touch to them. The only thing that kind of I wasn't mad about is that, like, there's an animatronic kind of animal vibe to it.
Okay.
But it's very, very lightly touched on.
Only in the,
just on the
box,
art, just on the box, and on some of the art style.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, given the game it is, the mechanics of it, it would have been a wasted effort to try and squash or shoehorn a theme into it. But it was the only little thing I kind of thought was, I wouldn't have minded seeing more of the animals, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I didn't even notice or know that there was like an animal vibe in it until you had said it.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, I literally didn't know, but the pieces are very nice. They are wooden, like each one has its own little shape, like the cottage is one shape, the churches is one shape, taverns and so on.
Yeah.
Like, and there's quite a number of them in each of those little villages, little wooden pieces, which could be expensive sometimes, but it's not that bad.
Well, it's perfect, you know. I mean, it's a great value game. It's a nice big box, so it's a lovely little gift, and it's actually a good price. So I think the components on this are perfect because of kind of the price they were going for, the market they were going for, and bits and pieces like that. Well, let's move on to the next question, which is, if you're teaching the game for the first time, of the two of them, which do you find is an easier gateway game for new players?
Easier to teach. It's not that bad to teach, but I would say Tiny Towns is easier to teach. There's like the gameplay that happens here, it's grand, it's reasonably straightforward. There's 1 or 2 little pieces that might catch you, like the apartments having to build up, which I really think is the stickler for new people. In here, it's as straightforward as, you've literally called out a cube to pick up. I now know to pick up that cube, and it's up to me where it goes, and that is where I need to put my building also.
And, depending on the combination.
The rules are done.
Yep, that's it. Like, depending on the combination of cubes, that's where your building goes. I have 2 words that I use to describe this game.
Yeah.
Tetris, bingo. And basically that's 80% of the rules explained straight away.
Yeah.
So it's a much simpler game, and what I like about it as well is it's game time. This game, now it says 45 minutes on the box, but I find that people get the games done in 20 minutes, 30 minutes.
This is a very quick game, yeah.
Yeah, there's a touch of analysis paralysis in the latter part sometimes, but you can play this game 3 or 4 times in a row quite easily, because the cards swap up the buildings you plan and things like that.
Yeah.
So depending on what cards you draw, you have different patterns for different buildings. So there's a nice kind of refreshing of the actual gameplay time. So you could have a trial game for 20 minutes and then have a proper game in the second round where people who are brand new to it have grasped the strategy and can actually become maximally kind of competitive.
Yeah.
Whereas Quadropolis, it's actually quite simple. There's great complexity to it, but it takes you a round or 2 before you grasp and get a strategy.
Yeah.
So if I was brand new to Quadropolis, it'd be the second night we played that I'd be able to kind of compete properly with it.
Yes.
But with Tiny Towns, the second game would be 20 minutes after the first one, and I'd be able to compete competitively
straight away
then. So it's great in that sense, especially for new players, I think.
Yeah. I find also that, like, because of the playtime, but in the playtime so short, is because there's very little time down between your turn, and the fact that you don't even wait for your turn for something to be happening to you or with you, because again, it's just, you called out a cube. I have the cube, I have to put it on here. The only time it might slow up is if it comes around to me and I'm not sure what I'm doing for what cube I want or what building I want to build. But like there's zero downtime in that really, and you're constantly in the game, but you're in the game. It's just you and your board, and there's nothing else happening.
Yeah.
Here, there's a lot more time and place to be locked up. The game is longer technically. It can go swift enough, but like you do have to be thinking out how you want to place your architects, your surveyors, to get what you want and to place it on your board appropriately, because that's the way you get points.
Yeah.
In this game.
I agree, and it's interesting as well because in terms of the competitiveness, you kind of touched on it there when you're saying you're focused on your board. I'm focused on my own tiny little town. So when the resources are called out, it's other people calling out the resource, and you get to kind of call out your own resource as well. So if you time it or it's fortuitous enough, it's easier to kind of just focus on your own board and forget about the other players. So if you, like, this plays up to 6 people.
Yeah. So
if you have 6 people playing, it's kind of hard to be ultra competitive and to mess with other players, because there's too much going on and I'm focused on my own board all the time. In Quadropolis, we all have our own boards, but there's a central area that we all draw from, that we put our architects and our surveyors on. So it's easier to keep tabs on your opponents with that one.
Yeah.
And I think the max player in that's 4, isn't it?
Yeah, it's 4. And you always know what's happening in here, because it's as straightforward as like, I have my 4 surveyors. Everybody has 4 surveyors. I know by looking at the main board what they've played. I know what I've played. I know where the space is on my board.
Yeah.
And you kind of know what they have available to them. You can mess with them, but it's normally more fortuitous to plan to benefit you.
Yeah.
And then you can kind of incidentally mess with them. In this one, it's not as competitive, or like there isn't a rivalry here. It's like if you happen to mess over someone on that, it is almost completely by happenstance. Yeah,
I would agree. Yes, I would agree with you. It's only towards the end game.
Yeah.
When my board is kind of full and I'm able to look at what you're doing and I'm able to look at the cards, I'm able to kind of plan accordingly, because I'm too busy in my own head trying to kind of maximize my resources. Whereas in Quadropolis, because we're all looking at the same central board to draw our resources from, it's easier for me to kind of mess with you, or to sabotage your plans, or to look at what you're trying to do and kind of curtail it.
In that way, in that sense, like I'd say nearly that's technically the more family friendly, if you understand, because it's not as competitive as what Quadropolis would be. Like there's no like harshness to it. It's like, oh, just building my nice little town and just focus on what I'm doing, and that's grand. And there's no hard feelings after that.
Yeah,
you might get some hard feelings here with Quadropolis, but like when it comes down to competitive games, a competitive game is a competitive game at the end of the day. But
it kind of dials down to. But you know what? I think you're right. In terms of the competitiveness, I think I prefer Quadropolis, because there's more layers of strategy with it.
Okay.
You know, I mean, like I said, ironically, again, that's the more complex game, despite the fact that it looks from the box lid a touch simpler, because you're building up
as well. Yeah.
Whereas in this one, you're just maximizing the flat space.
Yeah.
So it's a combination of Tetris and Bingo here, but whereas on that there is
just straightforward. I know what I need to do, but I need to build things in a certain way.
Yeah, and it's kind of opportunistic and trying to kind of use your surveyors and kind of competing for the same resources. So this will bring me to another question, I think, which is replayability.
I think they come to like an equal pass there. The replayability here is in the randomness of the tiles that come out, and that's even round to round, because they get placed completely randomly from a bag, and then once round 1 is done, I'll do the same thing again. So that's all different. And it has the expert mode on the other side of the scoring sheet as well, that has the skyscrapers and the different ways of drafting your surveyors and stuff.
Yeah.
So like, if you were bored or you've started to find normal way too easy, you can level up your gameplay here by going to the expert side of the board and making it just that slightly bit more difficult if you just wanted that little bit more crunchiness to it.
Well, that's it. Like there's for say kind of mid-level to kind of complex board gamers, it's got the crunchiness.
Yeah.
This is still really a kind of a light snack.
This is the easier game.
It's the easier
for sure.
game. But yeah, it's interesting because if I was in a kind of a building mood for a board game, this would be a great warm up. If, like I said, this would be kind of the nice starter if that was the main course.
Actually, yeah, you could literally do it that way as well. You could just start with that. Was that 20 minutes? I now have an hour and a half. Let's go play.
Yeah, because
Quadropolis.
It would kind of warm that part of the brain up if you were going to play something like that, and it'd also be a nice little warm down game as well. But in terms of if you're a meaty gamer and you like your complexity, and like it's fun hanging out. I would say Quadropolis is if you're looking for the cerebral kind of aspect. There's more variety in things there. Now that's not to say that you don't get brain puzzlers in this. Like like there's an interesting.
It's puzzling in a different way.
Yeah, puzzling in a different way and more focusing on your own thing. Whereas that I think is more central, so you can kind of compete a little bit better. So, I guess we should look at, say, the pros and cons of the games. Okay. I mean, I have a lot of pros for this game. I'm quite fond of it. It just doesn't have the complexity of Quadropolis that I'd like.
Okay. So your pros is just it looks nice, all the wooden pieces, and it's quick to play. Your con is just that you would rather it be more difficult.
Well, it gets more difficult. I mean, it has a solo variant. You can make it as difficult and as kind of varied as you want. I mean, the beautiful thing about this is there's great replayability because the town cards change, the patterns change. So you can play 3 games in a row without it feeling like the same thing because there's a great variety to it. But it still boils down to kind of Tetris bingo to a degree. Now, there's part of the solo variant where you draw the cards and you just have to deal with the cube, which again is even more fun. So you're trying to maximize what's going on there. And some of the more monument cards are interesting in that for example, you get the most amount of points with a monument card if you only build 1 or 2 types of buildings. Whereas with Quadropolis, it is literally, I'm planning my city. So if I'm looking for docks, I'm going to try and grab all the docks I can, and if I notice you're competing for docks, we're both going to go for it. Or I'm going to need fuel to power my dock, or I'm going to need people to run my dock, or my town.
Get whatever title appropriate. Yeah.
This has a touch of that in terms of the feast halls, for the cottages, or the food halls, or the beer houses, or things like that. So there is similarities in it, but I think that's the crunchier game. Yeah. How about yourself? What would you consider the pros and cons of either?
Well, it's like the similar pros is that that's nice to look at. It's the quicker game to play. The only con, and like this, like could be personal to me, is that you could bounce off it because you don't like the lateral logic of the way Tiny Towns plays, because you're having to place your resources in kind of specific ways in order to min-max your space, and then building your building at the right time so you can free up the extra spaces, stuff like that. That's a very kind of lateral logic puzzle that you have to do, and there are people out there that would just bounce off that, and it's like, be not for me, like, because I did enjoy playing it. It just wasn't for me. Like, I guess it wasn't all the way there for me because of the bingo aspect. Maybe it was just maybe that touch too simple. Not quite sure, but like that lateral logic is the con for me. It's that some people could bounce off it that way. Yeah. Here, the pros is that it's easy. While it might not be easy to set up, that is quick, technically. Yeah. That is a very quick, I know, take out row 1, put all of row 1 out, we're starting playing. Yeah. And all the pieces look nice. My insert is lovely. The box is heavier, which is why I have a lid.
I was going to ask you about that, actually.
The box is heavier than your box. It technically is probably more expensive. That could be a con to bounce off of. And like the one thing I would say that it's the con of it is, like, no offense to the game, it looks lovely set up. But if you're new to games or whatever, and you've set that out in front of them, that will look intimidating to someone.
Yeah.
They would like that. That's not, it's like, oh, they could say it's like, oh, it looks very complicated. It is a little bit, but not as much as they're thinking, you know?
It's actually a lot simpler than it seems to appear.
Yes.
Whereas this is, well, it's
about as simple as it appears.
As simple as it appears. Tetris Bingo puts people at ease immediately when I use those two words to kind of explain the game. So that it is interesting. It's kind of a pro and a con for both of them in terms of just that being a little bit more complex. Well, which will bring me to, I would consider, the final question. The house is on fire. Your board game collection has gone up in flames. You can only save one of them.
Okay.
Which one are you saving?
Quadropolis for me.
Quadropolis?
Yeah, it's because it comes down to it. It's like I didn't quite click as much with Tiny Towns as I have with Quadropolis. They both have probably equal replayability. This is just like, because it's the meatier game, it's a longer game. It was like, it's very quick, Tiny Towns. But once I've had that one or two plays, I'd be happy not to play it for quite a reasonable amount of time again. But whereas, like, if you were to ask me, it was like, if I wanted a game of Quadropolis, I probably would put it down week after week, reasonably enough, maybe, like, you know.
Fair enough. Well, if it was me, I would be grabbing Tiny Towns. And the reason I'd be grabbing Tiny Towns is that if my board game collection goes up, my board game friends are probably going to go up with it. So this is the perfect game to get new board game friends to rebuild the collection with. If you know what I mean. It's an easier game to teach, you know, and it's a nice warm up, warm down game. And I suppose if I'm shivering out in the cold, you know, I can...
Technically, it's the lighter box too.
Well, yeah, there's that practical aspect as well.
But it's like, for me, that it's easier to find this, I think, than it is Quadropolis. It's the cheaper game as well. So
well, that's it.
I can replace it if I needed to. Maybe.
Fair enough. Well, there you have it, folks. In terms of a versus, I would say this is probably a draw.
There's no winners. There's no losers.
Yeah, they're both good. If anything, I'd say get both games. That's what I would nearly say. Because they actually bounce off each other very well.
Yeah.
I mean, we kind of hit on it that this would be, if it was a meal, this is a lovely starter. That's a nice main. And if you want dessert, you can go back to this. But they're similar enough, but different enough that they're actually, I think, both worth owning, and kind of just, you know, it's a nice night here with these two things.
Yeah, I agree.
So, thanks again for joining us. This is Sean from The Lucky Roll.
And I've been Eric.
Thank you very much for watching. As always, if you enjoyed these videos, please like, subscribe, all that good YouTube stuff. And until next time, good luck.
And God bless.